Today we're going to learn about proportions. A proportion is when you have two quantities or two amounts that have a constant ratio or rate. That means they change at the same rate. A proportion is an equation stating that two ratios or rates are equivalent. For example, I can have 10 prints that I get printed of pictures that cost $2. That's equal to $6 for 30 prints. So this would technically be set up as a proportion. So even though this looks like a ratio table that we have already learned, this can be rewritten as a proportion, where you would have something that looks like this. $2 for 10 prints is equal to $6 for 30 prints. And to get from one to the other, to get from 10 to 30, we multiply by 3, and to get from 2 to 6, we also multiply by 3. So this is what I mean when I say they're changing at the same rate. That's just like saying that we multiply the top number the same that we multiply the bottom number by. And these are actually equivalent fractions, or they look like equivalent fractions, but they are equivalent ratios. And a proportion is when you have this equation stating that two ratios, or rates in this case, are equivalent. And we can say that the cost is proportional to the number of prints because both quantities increase by multiplying them by 3. Now sometimes you might see a proportion equation where you're missing a value. In this case, we're going to look at this example down here. You might have 4/7 is equivalent to m over 35, and you might be required to find the value for m. Now there are two strategies to do this. You can make equivalent fractions or equivalent ratios. This just means you would multiply the top and bottom by the same to get to your numbers. So since you're given the 7 to 35, you can multiply 7 times 5 to get 35. And whatever you do to the bottom, you do to the top. So this means that you would do 4 times 5, and you would get m equals 20. Now the other strategy that you could use is cross multiplication, and we're going to do an example with that next. So for the equivalent fractions example, we started with 4/7 is equivalent to m over 35. All we had to do for this was to see how many times 7 goes into 35. And this is where understanding your multiplication facts comes in handy. I know that 7 times 5 is 35. So to get from 4 to our missing number, we would also multiply by 5, because remember, for it to be a proportion, the two amounts have to increase or decrease at the same rate, which means you multiply both the top and the bottom by the same number. Since 4 times 5 equals 20, m equals 20. Now we're going to try the cross multiplication strategy. You circle the diagonals. So we're going to circle the 4 times 30, or the 4 and 35, and the 7 and the m. And we're going to multiply the diagonals. I'm going to start with the variable side of our equation. That's going to give us 7 times m. Then we bring our equal sign straight down, and we have to solve 35 times 4. And 35 times 4 is 5 times 4 is 20, 4 times 3 is 12, and 12 plus 2 is 14. So now, after multiplying the diagonals, 7 times m, 4 times 35, we have 7m equals 140. And now we have a multiplication equation just like we had been working on in the past few days. So we can take our 7m, and when to isolate the variable, we divide by 7. That means over on the other side, we divide by 7. 7 divided by 7 is 1, and 1 times m is just m. And 140 divided by 7 is 20. So we get the same answer, but we just went about it a different way. And a lot of times, if you can do the equivalent fractions, do that because it will be easier, but there won't always be a number that you can get to by multiplying a whole number with. So sometimes the cross multiplication is necessary to do. We're going to go through two more examples. And for the two examples, I'm going to show you how you can do it with each strategy, with equivalent fractions and cross multiplication. And you will need to learn both ways of doing this. So please show your work for both. The first problem we're going to do is g over 2 equals 28 over 14. And I'll write it over here for the cross multiplication way. G over 2 equals 28 over 14. So to get from 2 to 14, I know that that's a simple multiplication problem where all I have to do is multiply by 7. The problem is my variable is over on the left-hand side. So I need to go backwards. So if I have to multiply by 7 to get from 2 to 14, that means to get from 14 to 2, I'm going to divide by 7. So you have to go in the direction that your missing number is in. Since our missing number is on the left-hand side, we have to go to the left. And since I did divided by 7 on the bottom for 14 to get to 2, we had divided by 7, we have to do the same thing at the top. 28 divided by 7, and then we'll get our answer for G. So when we do 28 divided by 7, we get 4. So I will know that G equals 4. Now let's try our cross multiplication strategy. First, I'm going to circle my diagonals. So that means I know I'm going to have to do 2 times 28, which is 56. And I'm going to have to do 14 times G, which is just 14G. To figure out how to get G isolated, I divide. So I put my division bar or my fraction bar there to show dividing. And we're going to divide by 14. And over on the right-hand side of the equation, we have to do the same inverse operation, so that's also division. 56 divided by 14. Now I've isolated the variable, and 56 divided by 14 is 4, because 4 times 14 is 56. So again, we got the same answer for both strategies. We just did different strategies. And again, you will need to learn both of these, so make sure you try to understand both and ask questions if you need help. We're going to do our last example, and this will be 14 over 16 is equivalent to b over 8. And we're going to do it both ways again, so make sure you copy down both the equivalent fraction strategy and the cross multiplication strategy. So over here I'm going to write 14/16 is equivalent to b over 8. First, since my variable is on the right-hand side, I'm going to go to the right. So I'm just going to draw my arrows as a nice visual guide. And now, since I don't know the value of the variable on the right-hand side, we're going to go down to the denominators to look at what we do know. And to get from 16 to 8, I know that I'm going to be dividing by 2. So again, I have to do the same thing at the very top. So to figure out the value for b, I have to do 14 divided by 2. So that gives me b equals 7. Now we'll move over to the cross multiplication strategy, and we're going to go ahead, circle the expression or the part with the variables first. That means I'm going to do 16 times b, so that's 16b equals, don't forget your equal sign, and then we have to do 14 times 8. So we're going to go ahead and solve off to the side. 14 times 8. 4 times 8 is 32. 8 times 1 is 8, plus 3 is 11. So we have 16b equals 112. This is a multiplication equation, and we solve these by doing the inverse operations. I get rid of my 16 through division. I'm going to divide both sides by the 16 to keep the equation balanced. 16 divided by 16 is 1, and 1 times b is just b. Now I need to do 112 divided by 16, and that would be 7. 16 times 7 is 112, and I have 0 leftovers, so b is just 7. So, just a recap, you can use either strategy. However, I do want you to learn both, because not every single problem with proportions will have numbers that you can easily divide and multiply. So cross multiplication might be the necessary strategy to use. That's why it's important to learn both of these. Second, both strategies will get you the correct answer as long as you work them out correctly. Now what I need you to do is make sure you complete the independent practice problems on the back of your video homework papers.